Well, the consequences for Britain of Brexit in the near term are going to be politically chaotic, and we've seen it already in split in the Conservative Party, splits in the Labour Party, so a distracted Britain that is really focused internally and incapable of thinking really strategically about any of the big things happening in the world. We're also going to see a British economy that performs less well than it should do and less well than its peers. We've seen the British economy has been about 1 percentage point of GDP growth off from its partners since the Brexit vote. In the medium term, it all depends on what kind of deal the UK gets. If it can strike what I would call a sensible Brexit with the rest of the EU, then Britain's economy will probably trail for a little while behind the rest of the EU's while it adjusts it. But in the medium term, Britain's got good demography, a strong financial sector, strong on technology, strong on higher education. In the medium term, actually, I think the UK will do okay. Where it won't do okay, probably or as well, is on its international influence. Britain's been a player globally, still a member of the UN Security Council, still a member of NATO, all of those things. But detaching itself from its core regional market, which has such clout in the geo-economic world we have today, is going to leave it scrambling more to try to be influential. And as it scrambles, it'll scramble more to try and be in sync with Europe. So the irony is Britain is going to leave the EU to spend more time focused on Europe. Brexit is not good for transatlantic relations. A, because it's unbalanced the EU a bit. Losing the UK, there's a test of leadership in the EU. Is it led by France? Is it led by Germany? Is it led by France and Germany? And none of those options are particularly attractive to the majority of EU member states. It also coincides, Brexit coincides with a rise of much more sovereigntist, much more nationally minded governments, not just in Central Eastern Europe, but some strong parties with these views also in Italy and really in Northern Europe as well, Finland, Sweden, etc. So Brexit departing is at a time of greater contention inside the EU. It both drives it and is going to make it more difficult to resolve. And because you'll have a more fractious EU, that makes the transatlantic relationship more complicated, because actually standing up to a much more mercantilist, assertive America, and America first America, is very difficult when you're divided internally. So Britain's departure is not good. It will lose, of course, also an internationally minded country and may make Europe a little bit more, the European Union, a little more inward looking, a little bit more parochial. Could affect the relationship with Russia. And Britain was one of the countries that took quite a tough view on the relationship with Russia. We now have a more contested view inside the EU. So there are going to be many spillovers that will affect the politics inside Europe, and by doing that, will affect the balance of the transatlantic relationship. The UK will be a less good spokesperson for the EU to America as well, because its voice will not be at the table. There's no doubt in my mind that Brexit was what we call in the UK the canary in the mine, the early warning signal of the phenomena that have become Trump, that were the rise of the Alternative für Deutschland in Germany. There had been the rise of Five Star and the Lega Nord to actually take over power in Italy. This, to my mind, is all part of the same phenomenon. It's interesting that there were many Americans who were big supporters of a much more muscular nationalist American foreign policy that saw Brexit as the first debate, put money into the Brexit debate. It was the Americans, ironically, not the Russians, that probably had some influence externally on the Brexit outcome, because I think there's a desire to turn away from what Trump calls the political correctness of a kind of neoliberal West that's lost touch with identity, with sort of Judeo-Christian culture that puts primacy on citizens over immigrants. You know, all of those more identity-based as well as economic left-behinds based debate was visible in Brexit, was visible in Trump, and is visible in what we're seeing in the rise of populist parties across Europe. And it's all part of one big package in my mind, which is a loss of trust in governments that championed globalization, but did not know how to adapt their own countries to deal with globalization. And so while we kept saying, oh, Britain's growing at 2.3% of GDP, well, some people in Britain were benefiting from that, but many were not. And so, you know, in a way, Brexit was the first example of a wave that's going to take a long time to recede.